Resuming debate, the honourable member for Mount Royal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to participate in today's debate, particularly after my friend from St. Albert, Edmonton, and it's always hard to follow him, but I will do my best. I would also like to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, as so many other members have, to thank all of our veterans across this country and all of the members of the armed forces on this eve of Remembrance Day, being the last time that we have this opportunity in this chamber before this year's celebrations. So, Mr. Speaker, the Canada Pension Plan amendments are something that are important for me to talk about because I think they are an example of cooperative federalism that has really succeeded. The Canada Pension Plan was originally started in the 1960s when we saw the fact that we had a lot of seniors that were moving into poverty after they left the workforce. And at the time, it was unclear as to who had jurisdiction over pension plans. There was a feeling that this may be purely a provincial jurisdiction. So, in the era of cooperative federalism, the provinces worked together to adopt a constitutional amendment to allow us to set up the Canada Pension Plan and later allowed Quebec to have its own plan that was similar in nature to the CPP. Today, this year, we recognized another problem with the plan. We saw that based on what we had all seen over the last many years, we still had a number of seniors that were not poor in the years that they were working, they were solidly middle class, but they were moving into poverty as they retired from their jobs. And we needed to see an augmentation to the amounts contributed under the Canada Pension Plan by both the employee and the employer, and to raise the wage ceiling under the Canada Pension Plan over time in order to ensure that over 1 million Canadians, when they reach retirement age, would not become poor under the class of who constitutes poor Canadians. That, to me, Mr. Speaker, is something that is important. And so what the federal government did is that we went to meet with the provinces. We went to talk to all of the provinces and secured agreement amongst 9 provinces in Canada to amend the Canada Pension Plan. That's not an easy thing, Mr. Speaker, to do. We have umpteen examples in Canadian history of federal-provincial negotiations that have gone awry, where the federal government was not able to convince the provinces to take action that the federal government thought would be in the best interest of Canadians. But in this case, the federal governments in all 9 provinces that participate in the CPP agreed to move forward, and Quebec also agreed to move forward with the review of its own pension plan. I think, Mr. Speaker, this speaks to cooperative federalism and speaks about the success story we can have in Canada when the federal government and provinces work together. I've also listened, Mr. Speaker, to the arguments brought forward by our friends in the official opposition as to why these changes to the CPP should not be made. Mr. Speaker, I am someone that believes that there is a dual obligation in this country. There is indeed an obligation to take care of yourself. I, Mr. Speaker, have had the luxury of having jobs that have allowed me to contribute the maximum to my RRSPs and indeed also to my TSFA every year. I do believe in individual initiative. I do believe it is a responsibility of individuals to take care of their own money and to contribute the best that they can to provide for their retirement. But as we know, Mr. Speaker, not all Canadians can do this because they don't earn enough, because they don't have that ability, and other Canadians, for whatever reason, seem unable to save enough for their retirement. As such, we have to come to a situation where there's a balanced approach. We've already decided, Mr. Speaker, over 50 years ago now, long before some of us were born, that the Canada Pension Plan was a good idea, that there needed to be a national plan, which, by the way, has much lower administrative costs than private plans, to allow the government to help Canadians to save for their retirement. That is not to say, Mr. Speaker, the government plays a nanny state or only role, but it is to say that we have all recognized that the government has such a role. If this is truly the case, then the government has the obligation and the responsibility to look at the current situation in our country, to look at what wages are in our country, to look at the fact that Canadian households have the highest debt ratio of any households in, I understand, the G7, and to say we have a situation in our country today that is problematic. Many Canadians are not adequately preparing for their retirement. Many Canadians are not making use of the RRSP contributions or the TSFA contributions. So what are we to do, Mr. Speaker, in order to prevent in the future having even more cost for the state when we see more and more seniors joining the poor after they stop working? We have to take proactive measures. We need to take preventative action. I'm very proud, Mr. Speaker, that we increased the senior income supplement by 10%. That helped bring many seniors out of poverty, but that is not a be-all and end-all solution, Mr. Speaker, because the goal is that most seniors shouldn't need that supplement, because most seniors shouldn't be that poor. People who have worked their entire lives, and Mr. Speaker, we're talking about Remembrance Day, well, at least I was, our veterans, Mr. Speaker. They built this country. The last thing we want to see is men and women coming out of the armed forces and becoming poor. But, Mr. Speaker, I see that in my riding. I see many of our World War II veterans who are now in their 90s, who are having trouble making ends meet. The president of our Legion even talked to me about how a number of his members have trouble affording medication and food. And that, Mr. Speaker, is very, very sad, because the pensions that they're living on are not sufficient. So one thing that we can do is to proactively take steps to fix this. Now, Mr. Speaker, in my previous life as a mayor, I had the obligation of being part of our municipal pension plan. And it is true, Mr. Speaker, that pension plans in Canada are changing. We are moving from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans. It is impossible for an employer in the private sector today to realistically say, I'm going to start a defined benefit plan, because we see, Mr. Speaker, that with changing markets, these have become a death knell of many employers in Canada. I can say, Mr. Speaker, in my old life as a general counsel of a multinational, we would not purchase a company that had a defined benefit plan, because a defined benefit plan was too risky in the private sector. So Canadian pension plans, fewer and fewer companies have these plans. More and more they're moving to defined contribution plans where we're unsure of the outcome in the end. And most companies being without plans, you find workers all across the private sector that do not have a pension plan when they retire. And so you have then two groups of workers. You have those who say, I'm going to save for my retirement and do my best to put money away, but are unable to do so for whatever reason, their kids' education, their rent or their mortgage is too expensive. And then others who are barely scraping by on the salaries they earn and don't have the measures to put money aside. So if we've all agreed the government has this role, and I think we do, because I've never heard the official opposition say we should scrap the CPP entirely. All I've heard is we shouldn't increase the amount that we're contributing now because it's a payroll tax, it's a tax on employer, it's a tax on the employee, and it's not $2,200 a year, by the way, but we'll leave that aside. If you agree with the premise behind having a CPP, then you need to look at it in the light of what is our economy like today, what people are being impacted by changes to the market today, meaning fewer companies having pension plans and fewer companies having defined contribution plans, the number of Canadian households in debt, the fact that average incomes and the cost of living is rising year by year, but the wage ceiling under the Canada Pension Plan has not been increased for many, many years. And then you need to take stock of that, and you need to say, well, we actually need to make a change. And we need to update the plan to bring it in line with where the Canadian situation is today. That is not to say that plans that allow Canadians to save money for themselves are not good. That is not to say that Canadians don't have responsibilities to govern their own funds and put monies aside, but we still need to help those who can't or are unable. And this, I think, is the right balance. The right balance in Canada is finding that place where the state intervenes to ensure the best interests of all Canadians are met. And in this case, the interests of Canadians are met by the fact that it will eventually cost the state a lot more if we don't take these actions to bolster the CPP, because there will be more and more people needing an OAS in the future. So what I think that we need to do is take stock of the fact that this is a necessary update.
Questions and comments? L'honorable député de Montmagny.